Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up, talking about all of the books that I read in the month of April, which is a total of 22 books, which might be my most prolific month ever reading-wise. And the reason why I read so many books is because April was Battle of the Bands Readathon, the readathon that me and Stacy co-created over on the Bookish Drummer Discord. And of course, the winner is Team LED Zeppelin. And funny enough, this is actually the first team that I've been a part of for any readathon that I've won. So it's a great feeling. But I just wanted to thank you guys so much for the people who participated in the readathon. You guys are all awesome. I think we had a total of, 45 people submit books, and we submitted over 600 books, which is incredible. So many people read all 20 prompts, which I was not expecting. It was a fantastic turnout, and everybody did awesome, and thank you guys for making it such a fun experience. And now, my reward is I have to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of April. I did read 22. 2 of the books weren't for the readathon, so yeah, very prolific month for me. But enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. This isn't going to be in any kind of order or anything, but the first chunk of books here, I did a lot of audiobooks for books that I don't own physically, so we're going to get those out of the way first, and then second half will be all the physical stuff that I had. So the first one I'll talk about is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. Now, I was excited to read this book last year, and I originally wanted to read it for the Stephen King readathon, but it wasn't long enough because it was just under 200 pages. But for this one, we counted anything over 150 pages, so I got to listen to it. And I liked it. I think it could have been better, though. I wish it would have more focused on, the mythology of these weird, Ku Klux Klan monsters, and, I don't know. It just felt something was, I just felt something was missing. There's portions of this that I liked, and then other aspects that I didn't like as much. It was kind of frustrating, but overall, I think I gave it 3.5 stars. It was pretty good, but I just had so much potential that I just wish it was better. I also listened to Stones of Light by Zach Argyle, which is the second book in the Threadlight trilogy. I read Voice of War, and I thought it was pretty good, although the pacing was a little wonky because it was supposed to be told in 3 perspectives, but you didn't really get one until the second half. It was kind of a mixed bag for me, and unfortunately kind of the same deal with book 2. Book 2 had a lot of great moments, but overall it just, I don't know, it just felt like it's gonna sound like an insult, but it felt like Diet Sanderson to me. It felt like a Sanderson book, but just not quite as good, which might be a little rough sounding, but I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. Because I know people, I think this would be a great starting fantasy. If you've never read fantasy, Threadlight would be a great introduction. But I've read a ton of fantasy now, and it just didn't really click with me. I probably won't get to book 3 anytime soon. I might give it a go later on, but for now, I'm just going to stop here. Book 2 was okay, 3.5 stars. I also listened to The Kill Club by Wendy Hurd, and this was the 3rd book in me and Stacy's Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club over on the Bookish Drummer Discord. I think most people had a decent time with this. I think most people gave it a chill or maybe even a thrill. I think I landed on 4 stars. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was 3 stars. It's too many books to remember, right? I gave it 3 stars just because I really liked the premise, but overall it felt very similar to a previous thriller that I've read called The Chain. It had kind of a similar feeling to it. And then there was just lots of moments in this book that was just, it was really hard for me to suspend my disbelief for, especially towards the end and just throughout the book, really. I think it could have been better. I did enjoy some aspects of the main character, but at the same time, she was a bit annoying and just like, you just wanted to like sit her down, like, look, listen. But, you know, I did like that she was a drummer. You don't see a lot of drummer characters, but that was cool. But overall, it was kind of a chill for me. 3 stars. I also listened to Expert Systems' Brother by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this one was a very short novella. I think it was like a little more than 4 hours on audio. I actually don't remember that much about it, even though I did give it 4 stars. I remember the world building was really cool. Like, there's some really out there stuff in this book, and it was kind of an interesting mix of fantasy and sci-fi. I might actually have to go re-listen to it. But yeah, it was interesting. I just don't really remember too much about it. So I think it's worth a re-listen. And then it also has a sequel that's also like around 4 hours. So I probably need to go do that. But from what I remember, the world building was outstanding. And it continues to show that Adrian Tchaikovsky is just one of the most creative and imaginative writers out there working today. I also listened to The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham, and I liked this one. I gave it 3.5 stars. I've given a lot of books this month 3.5 stars, apparently. And I really liked the beginning. I really liked the character of Jack, and I really thought it had some really great moments. Overall, though, for me, it was the pacing. The pacing was just non-stop. Like, this book, like, none of the characters got any breathing room. And for me, like, as a character reader, I like to be able to sit with the characters after some tense moments and get some good, like, character development and some good just character moments of them just, like, putting their thoughts out there. But for this book, it was just, like, one thing after the other. Like, boom! And then, oh, boom! And then just stuff is constantly happening. But overall, it was a very compulsive read. And I really couldn't stop listening to it because it was just so fast. But I really wish we would have gotten some time to just sit with the characters. Overall, pretty great debut. I will read more by A.R. Witham if he comes out with more stuff. But overall, Legend of Blackjack was pretty good. Another book I listened to was After the People Lights Have Gone Off by Stephen Graham Jones. And what did I give this book? 3.5 stars. This is a short story collection by Stephen Graham Jones, one of my favorite horror writers working today. This is like an older one, I believe. And it had kind of a rough start. Like, the first few short stories I really couldn't get into. It maybe could have been a mood thing. Maybe I was like in the middle of this readathon and I was just like, oh man. But once it got going, like, the short stories did get really good, and there's some standout ones in here. But overall, like with most collections that you'll read, it's a mixed bag. Some are really good, some are kind of forgettable. But overall, I did enjoy it. 3.5 stars. This next book that I listened to, I did not give 3.5 stars. In fact, I gave it 4.5 stars. And that would be Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And this is kind of his memoir. I'm not really like a huge fan of Trevor Noah. I know he replaced Jon Stewart with The Daily Show, and I watched like clips of it. He's pretty funny. But overall, I didn't really know that much about him. So I pretty much went into this audiobook going in blind. And it was really good. It was not only very informative about just like the craziness of South Africa and like the races and just how racist everything is there, but in just his life and his family. It was also very funny, and there's some laugh out loud moments in here. There's a chapter in here called Go Hitler, which that might be one of the funniest things I've ever listened to. Read and find out, trust me. It was hilarious. One of my favorite books that I read in the month of April. Another favorite book that I read, or that I listened to, is The Bone Shard War by Andrea Stewart, which is awesome because I finally finished the damn trilogy. A lot of my friends were making fun of me just because I had read Bone Shard War and I reread it. I read it 3 times, and then I was like, okay, I gotta actually finish the damn trilogy. I read book 2, thought it was pretty good. It's like 3.5, 4 stars. Bone Shard War I thought was much better than the sequel, and I'm glad that it ended well and that it stuck the landing in my mind. I gave it 4.5 stars. I still love book one. I think book one is just perfect with with the blend of everything. But book three did bring everything together. There's still some elements of the story, kind of spoiler stuff that I can't talk about, but it did bring down the rating a little bit. But overall, it had a lot of great moments and a very satisfying ending to the trilogy. So I'm really glad that I listened to it and that I'm finally finished and that it was really good. And my Patreon pick that I listened to on audio was An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors. And this was picked for me to read by Josephina. She really likes this book, and I think the whole trilogy as a whole. And when I first started it, I think I wanted to do it more at the beginning of the month, but I kind of listened to the first chapter and I couldn't really quite get into it, and then I put it on pause, and then I came back. It had a little bit of a rough start for me, but once it got going, like in chapter 3 or 4, and I got my footing in, and I kind of figured out who the characters were, what their motivations were, what the kind of grander picture of the story is, I really got into it, and the second half of the book is just crazy. It's very imaginative. It's got all these different elements from all different kinds of stories kind of just meshed well into one cohesive thing. And I really like that when an author can kind of take multiple elements and still make it cohesive without just saying like, "Ooh, look at this thing. Ooh, look at this thing." Kind of Ninth Rain felt like that. Like it had a lot of cool stuff, but it really just didn't feel cohesive. But for this one, it just all blended well together. And I will for sure be reading book 2. I wish I had time to read it in May, but I probably won't. I'll probably read it in June. And I gave this first book, Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors, 4 stars. I also listened to Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enrique. And I'll actually just go ahead and mention her other book that I read, which is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by the same author, Mariana Enrique. I read this one first, and I really enjoyed this one. There was a couple, they're both short story collections, horror short story collections, by the way. There were a few in here that were kind of like okay or forgettable, but for the most part, this was very steady, and just all the stories felt very unique, and I really liked almost all of them. So I gave this one 4 stars. Things We Lost in the Fire, I think was more of a mixed bag, but the ones that were like good were like really good. There were some forgettable ones in that one, but there were some other ones that are not forgettable. Let's just say it that way. But overall, I really do enjoy her writing style, and I'm very much looking forward to checking out her novel, which I don't remember the name of it. Something like Our Night, something, I don't know. But I think I'm going to be reading this in July, sometime in the summer maybe. Buddy reading it with a few people. I'm very excited. But her short story collections are pretty good. And continuing with the 3.5 star trend, I also listened to Wistful Ascending by J.C.M. Byrne. Now this audiobook was kindly gifted to me by the author in exchange for a fair and honest review. And I did a Goodreads review, which I'll link down below, and an Audible review as well. And I'm going to be talking about it here. Thank you so much for the author, or from the author. Yeah, I did enjoy this book. I think it's a debut, so it had a few issues for me, but I still really liked it. Again, I think with debut authors, pacing tends to be a thing that they can't, or they don't get right. I mean, a lot of people love this book, so it could just be my taste. But for me, it just had like brief moments of action that were really good, and then just chapters and chapters of just like slow moving, like really just dialogue, which the dialogue was probably my favorite part of the book, but also I think the pacing suffers because of it, because not a lot happens throughout a lot of this book, and then there would be bam, something happens. You're like, oh, and then a lot of falling action, a lot of lull time. It kind of happened that way throughout the book. I wish it would have been smoothly paced throughout the novel. But again, a lot of people love this book. A lot of people give it 4 or 5 stars. I will be continuing at some point. I hear book 2 isn't quite as good as book 1, but I hear book 3 is absolutely amazing. So I will eventually try out the rest of the series. And yeah, I think overall a fairly good debut novel. So I gave it 3.5 stars. All right, so now let's talk about the books that I own physically that I read in the month of April. And one of my least favorites that I read this month was Absent in the Spring by Agatha Christie under the pen name of Mary Westmacott. Now, I've read a ton of Agatha Christie books, but I've never tried one of her Mary Westmacott books because I knew that they weren't like her typical murder mysteries. They were more like contemporary, like dramas, maybe. Like maybe there's some sort of mystery, but like not, it's not really anything like her normal stuff. And I went into this one thinking that I was going to enjoy it. But for most of this, honestly, I was just bored. It did get a little better towards the end, and it's mainly like about a character kind of like self-actualizing and just realizing who she is as a person. And like towards the end, there were some good moments, but overall, I was bored by most of this book. I gave it 2.5 stars. I will probably not read any more Mary Westmacott unless someone convinces me otherwise, but overall, I didn't have a great time with this one. I also read an entire trilogy in the month of April. 2 of them are rereads, and then the third book was a brand new release in the month of April, so I was very pumped. And that would be Savannahville's new trilogy, Take Them to the Stars. And like I said, book 1 and 2, A History of What Comes Next, and Until the Last of Me were both rereads, and I liked them a lot, obviously. I gave book 1 4.5 stars, and then I think the first time I read book 2, I gave it 4 stars, but I bumped it up to 4.5 stars now. Very good. And then the third and final book did not disappoint. I also gave it 4.5 stars. I love, love, love Savannahville. My only problem with this trilogy is that the books are too short. And what I mean by that is that in these books, they're all like 250 to 300 page books with fairly short chapters of like 50 to 60 chapters each. And a lot of the times, like moments of tension or like just action stuff goes by so quickly, like 1 to 2 pages. I'm just like, you gotta flesh it out a little bit more for me. But overall, I love the characters that he creates. I love the premise of these this mother and daughter who are trying to get people to, you know, reach the stars and to like leave Earth because of reasons, Rapho. And I love like how he inserts real historical events into the story. This starts out in like World War II and then goes up to the beginning of the 60s. And then this is like 60s, 70s, 80s. And then this is like 90s, 2000s. Each chapter title is like a song from like the generation that the book's written in. And it's just got some outstanding moments. Like this is definitely a solid sci-fi trilogy, one of my all-time favorite sci-fi trilogies, and I'm glad that the third book stuck the landing. And it's pretty much cemented Savannahville as like a top 10, maybe top 5 author of all time. Definitely top 10, and I love, love this trilogy. Go read it. I also read a couple Cormac McCarthy books. One of them was Outer Dark, which was the winner for Guess the Beat, and I'm having a tough time remembering who won Guess the Beat, but they wanted me to read this. Was it Bran? Was it you, Bran? I think so. Bran wanted me to read Outer Dark, and then I picked up Child of God because I found this book in Canada, I believe, book shopping with Stacy, and I did immersion reading, and this audio is only like 3.5 hours, so I said, why not? Let's do it for the readathon. Get those points, baby. I'm not the biggest fan of Cormac McCarthy. The only book that I've really like thoroughly enjoyed by him was No Country for Old Men, which I gave 4 stars. I think the dialogue in that book and just the story and the execution was very well done. Everything else has just been pretty good or mediocre. I really didn't like The Road. I thought Blood Meridian was pretty good, although kind of hard to read at times with all the flowery stuff and kind of hard to decipher like what he was going for a lot of the times. These ones were a bit more simple, but originally I gave this one 3 stars, but then once figuring out, talking to people who love Cormac McCarthy, figuring out why he wrote this book and like why it kind of makes sense, I bumped it up to 3.5 stars. Still not an all-time favorite. It's not something I'll ever reread again. It was pretty good, pretty dark. Yeah, again, Cormac McCarthy is just not a favorite of mine. Outer Dark, I was very much looking forward to because I think I was told it was like supposed to be like kind of his horror book, kind of like it has horror elements, and I can definitely see that. This book was definitely dark and depressing, although for me, it did get repetitive at times. Like it felt like the characters were kind of doing the same thing. And again, I was trying to figure out why he was writing it. I just don't think I'm going to have the best time with his books. I understand why people love him just because of his simple writing. Oh, I'm holding this upside down. I'm a simpleton, clearly. I understand why people love him because of his simple writing and his themes that are, layered richly in his books, and they're trying to decipher everything. It's not for me. Even though I loved No Country for Old Men, I think that might be atypical of his writing style. These books were just, they were good, pretty good, but they're not going to be all-time favorites for me. Another book I read in April was Central Park by Guillermo Musso. It's funny. This book I was supposed to buddy read with Stacy, and since I own a physical copy, I was going to read the book to her, but I attempted to, but this book was originally written in French, so there's a lot of like French pronunciations, like including the author's name, which I just terribly butchered, and she actually speaks French, so she was not having it because it was so distracting to her for me to try to pronounce all of these French stuff. She was like, babe, it's pronounced like this. And I would try to pronounce it. And it just went on like that for like the first 4 chapters. She's like, you know what? I got a lot of other books to read. So why don't you go read it? And I did. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. This book is absolutely bonkers. Like this book is so, I was not expecting this book to be that bonkers. Like it has a bonkers premise of like these 2 people wake up handcuffed together in Central Park and they have amnesia and they have no idea how they got there, and it goes from there, and which is a pretty crazy kooky premise, but it goes in a lot of places I did not expect. And overall, like it's hard to just, it's like watching a good bad movie. Like the movie is so bad but it's hilarious. It's so funny. Like that's kind of how I felt reading this book. Like just the ending was so ridiculous and so kooky, but it was so awesome at the same time. I really did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. My least favorite book of the entire readathon, which I really kind of struggled with, was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, I wanted to like this book because of the premise. I think it's got a pretty cool premise of this guy is like in charge of like a bunch, he's like an ambassador for like all these different galaxies or something like that. Clearly I love this book. But he goes to this other like alien planet, and with their species, they actually like, they cycle through genders. So like every however many days, like 30 days or like the moon cycle or whatever, they go from male to female and vice versa. And it was a pretty interesting concept. And the whole thing is like the struggles of trying to understand each other. And like the people on this planet kind of look at this guy who is just male as kind of like a pervert. Like, oh, you stay one sex? Like, ew. So I liked that kind of thing, but it was just the writing style of like classic sci-fi, of just like, it's all about the concept and just the scientific stuff, and not really anything to do with the actual plot or creating interesting characters, which is why I typically don't read classic sci-fi to begin with. Like I've tried Asimov and I've tried Clark and Heinlein, but it's just all about the idea and nothing to do with good characters or story. And that's how I felt with this one, and I gave it 2 stars. I really didn't like it. I wanted to like it a lot because of the premise, and it sounded really cool, but I didn't really enjoy it at all. And the last book that I managed to squeeze in during the readathon was Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. I actually was supposed to read another book, but I actually finished my books like faster than I thought I would. So I was like, you know what, let's read a chunkier book that can also continue a series and finish a series. So I had Jade Legacy sitting there, and I was like, okay, let's read it. And I think in previous videos I've mentioned that Jade City, 3.5 stars, Jade War, 3.5 stars, but I had heard so many people say that book 3 was an improvement and that it just like blows the other 2 books out of the water. And I do agree that this book is definitely better, although I only gave it 4 stars. I think this book is excellently paced. The other 2 books I had pacing problems. But this one is excellently paced. Like, stuff happened throughout this book, and you get a lot of great character moments. But for me, I'm still just not... it's a me thing. Like, I completely understand why people love this series, and they love this book, and they give it 5 stars. I have no problem with that. But for me, I'm just not a fan of fantasy where the setting feels like our world. Like, if I'm reading fantasy, I want it to feel alien. Like, I want it to feel like a completely foreign place. But in this book, there's airplanes and cell phones. And especially in this book, they're talking about, like, movie adaptations and, like, creating movies about characters' lives. I'm just like, this is not fantasy. Really, the only fantasy element in here is the jade magic. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is just like our world. So that really does kind of take me out of the story. But still, it has wonderful character moments and a lot of tense action, and just a lot of crazy stuff happens in this book. So I completely understand why people love this book. It's just not going to ever be a favorite for me. But I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. All right. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anything. I believe that's 22 books that I talked about here that I read in the month of April. So I had a lot of new favorites, and I actually got to read 3 new releases in April, and I gave all of them 4.5 stars. So I loved all of them. That would be Bone Shard War for the Drowning Empire, book 3. Great. I read for the first time again, book 3 in Savannahville's new trilogy, Take Them to the Stars. And I got to read, I did forget a book. Shit. I also read For You and Only You by Caroline Kepnes, which is the 4th Joe Goldberg book. I loved that book as well, and I gave it 4.5 stars. My only issue with it is that the series is definitely getting repetitive. Like, pretty much, not exactly, but almost beat for beat, it's the exact same story as book 3 and a lot of the previous stuff. It's still really good, and it's still really fun, but I really hope that if she continues the series, which I'm sure she will with book 5, hopefully she kind of throws a wrench into the story and kind of mixes it up a little bit, because it's pretty much the exact same stuff over and over again. Although it's great, and I'm going to keep reading it because I love Joe Goldberg, and I love the humor, the really dark humor, and just all of the craziness that ensues. I hope that she kind of mixes it up a little bit. So now I've mentioned all 22 books, I believe. Let me double check. Okay, I think we're good now. So, thank you for watching. Yeah, those are all the books that I read. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and comment down below what you thought of them, whether you loved them, whether you hated them. Did you also participate in the Battle of the Bands readathon? If so, were you on Team LED Zeppelin? Did your team win? Or did you admit utter defeat? Either way, it was a really fun time, and so many people read 20 books. It's insane. So I'm glad a lot of people got a lot of reading done. What were your favorite books that you read in the month of April? I want to know, so comment down below. And anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this hectic video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookish Drummer Discord. I also have my Patreon page and my Amazon wish list. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.